The moment 34-year-old Olga Petrov and her 9-year-old daughter Anya walked onto the Voice Kids stage together, something profound filled the air. Not because of their simple, carefully chosen clothes that spoke of people rebuilding their lives from nothing, or the way Anya clutched her mother's hand with the desperate grip of a child who had learned too young that safety could disappear without warning, but because of the quiet dignity they carried despite everything they had endured. What nobody in that studio knew was that just 18 months earlier, Olga and Anya had fled their home in Kyiv, Ukraine, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a small backpack containing the few precious belongings they could carry as bombs fell around their neighborhood. And what was about to happen would prove that some of the most beautiful music comes from hearts that have been broken by war, but refuse to let that brokenness silence their songs. Hidden in their story was a bond forged by survival, strengthened by loss, and sustained by the kind of mother-daughter love that can carry you across continents when everything familiar has been destroyed. Let me take you back to understand how this extraordinary pair reached this stage, because their journey proves that music truly is a universal language that can bridge any distance, overcome any barrier, and heal even the deepest wounds. Olga Petrov had been a music teacher in Kyiv, working at a small elementary school where she taught children to sing traditional Ukrainian folk songs, to play simple instruments, to understand that music was part of their cultural heritage that connected them to generations of their ancestors. Her small apartment had been filled with the sounds of Anya practicing piano, of mother and daughter singing together in Ukrainian and Russian, of a life built around melody and harmony. Anya had inherited her mother's musical gifts, but more than that, she had inherited Olga's understanding that music could express emotions that words couldn't capture. Even at 9 years old, Anya could sing with the kind of emotional depth that comes from living through experiences that should never touch a child's life. Their world had shattered on a February morning when the sound of explosions replaced the usual morning symphony of birdsong and traffic. What had started as distant rumbles quickly became the terrifying reality of war arriving at their doorstep. Olga had grabbed Anya, their passports, and the small music box that had belonged to Anya's grandmother, and they had joined the stream of refugees fleeing toward the western border. The journey had been a nightmare of crowded trains, sleeping in subway stations, walking for miles when transportation wasn't available, and the constant fear that safety was always temporary, always fragile. Anya had stopped singing completely during those first weeks of displacement, her voice silenced by trauma, by confusion, by the overwhelming reality of becoming a refugee at 9 years old. They had spent 6 months in a refugee camp in Poland, living in a tent with other displaced families, sharing meals from aid organizations, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy for Anya, while Olga struggled with her own grief for everything they had lost. It was during those dark months that music had slowly returned to their lives. "Mama," Anya had said one evening as they lay on their narrow camp bed, listening to other refugees talking quietly in the darkness, "can we sing the song about the birds, the one Babasia taught us?" Olga had started crying then, understanding that her daughter was asking for more than just a song. She was asking for connection to home, to family, to the culture and identity that war had tried to take from them. They had sung softly together in Ukrainian, their voices joining other whispered conversations in a dozen languages, creating a lullaby of displacement that somehow made them feel less alone. The opportunity to come to America had come through a refugee resettlement program. A church in Ohio had sponsored them, providing a small apartment, help with paperwork, and patient guidance as they navigated a new country, a new language, a new way of life. The congregation had been kind, welcoming, but Olga and Anya still felt like strangers in a strange land, trying to rebuild their identities from scratch. Learning English had been challenging for both of them. Olga's pronunciation was heavy with her Ukrainian accent, and Anya mixed Ukrainian and English words together in ways that sometimes made communication difficult. But music, they discovered, didn't require perfect English. Music transcended language barriers, connected hearts even when words failed. The idea to audition for The Voice Kids had come from Mrs. Patterson, Anya's ESL teacher, who had heard her humming Ukrainian melodies during recess and been struck by the beauty of her voice. Olga, Mrs. Patterson had said during a parent conference, "Anya has an incredible gift. She sings with such emotion, such authenticity. Have you considered that music might be a way for you both to share your culture, to find your place here in America?" Olga had been hesitant. Their English was still imperfect, their stories still too painful to share easily, their confidence still fragile from everything they'd endured. But Anya had been enthusiastic with the innocent hope that only children possess. "Mama, maybe if we sing, people will understand that we're not just refugees. Maybe they'll see that we have beautiful things to share too." The audition process had been overwhelming for Olga and Anya. They'd never been in a television studio, had never experienced the intensity of cameras and bright lights, had never been asked to share their story with strangers who might not understand the complexity of their journey. The Voice Kids producers had worked with refugee advocacy groups to ensure Olga and Anya felt supported and safe throughout the process. Standing on the Voice stage now, Olga felt every mile of the journey that had brought them from their destroyed home in Kyiv to this moment of possibility in Los Angeles. The lights were brighter than anything they'd experienced. The audience, larger than their entire refugee camp. The weight of representing not just themselves, but all displaced families pressing down on them with overwhelming intensity. Anya stood beside her mother, wearing a simple blue dress that volunteers at their church had bought for this special day. She held Olga's hand tightly, her other hand unconsciously reaching for the small music box that she always carried. The one precious link to the grandmother and homeland they might never see again. Blake Shelton, Kelly Clarkson, John Legend, and Niall Horan sat in their red chairs, their backs turned, unaware that they were about to meet representatives of the millions of people worldwide who had been forced to leave everything behind, who were trying to rebuild their lives in new countries while carrying the weight of unspeakable loss. "Whenever you're ready," Blake called out encouragingly, his voice carrying that familiar Oklahoma warmth that somehow reminded Olga of the kindness they'd found in their small Ohio community. Olga stepped forward slightly, her voice carrying the careful pronunciation of someone who had learned English as an adult, who chose each word deliberately. "Before Anya and I sing, we need tell you our story. We are from Ukraine. 18 months ago, war come to our home in Kyiv. We lose everything, our house, our family, our life we build." The coaches remained in their chairs, but the gravity in Olga's voice made them all lean forward, understanding that they were about to hear something profound. Olga's voice began to break as she continued, "We come to America with nothing, only clothes we wear and this." She pulled out Anya's small music box, its painted surface worn from being carried across continents. "This belonged to Anya's babushka grandmother, his only thing we saved from our home." Anya looked up at her mother, seeing the tears that Olga was trying to hold back, and something broke inside her small heart. The 9-year-old who had been trying so hard to be brave, to adapt to a new country, to learn a new language, suddenly couldn't contain the weight of everything they'd lost. "We lost everything," Anya said, her voice small but clear, her English careful but heartfelt. "But we still have music. Music same in Ukraine, same in America. Music make us feel like we still have home somewhere." The studio fell into profound silence as everyone processed what they were hearing, not just the words, but the courage it took for a refugee family to stand on national television and share their story, to ask for acceptance while being vulnerable about their journey from war to hope. Olga knelt down beside Anya, understanding that this moment was about more than just an audition. This was about showing America that refugees weren't just people running from something terrible, they were people carrying something beautiful, something worth preserving and sharing. "Music is only thing that stayed same," Olga continued, her accent making each word deliberate and precious. "When bombs fall, when we run, when we scared, we sing. Ukrainian songs, American songs, all songs. Music helps us remember we still human. We still have beauty inside even when everything broken. Blake Shelton felt something he'd never experienced in all his years of coaching. This wasn't just about talent or performance anymore. This was about human resilience, about families who had survived unimaginable hardship, about the power of music to preserve identity and create connection even in the darkest circumstances. Without hesitation, Blake was out of his chair and walking onto the stage, his cowboy boots clicking against the polished floor, as he approached this mother and daughter who represented everything noble about the human capacity to endure and rebuild. "Olga, Anya," Blake said softly as he reached them, "I want you both to know something. You are home now. Music doesn't have borders, love doesn't have borders, and talent doesn't have borders. You belong here." Anya looked up at this tall country star, who somehow felt like the kind of person who might understand what it meant to start over, to find belonging in unexpected places. "You really think we belong here?" "Anya," Blake replied, kneeling down to her level, "I think America is lucky to have you. I think music is lucky to have you. I think anyone who gets to hear you sing is going to understand that beauty can survive anything, even war. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming." Blake turned to address the other coaches, his voice carrying across the studio with the authority of someone who understood that some moments transcend entertainment. "Kelly, John, Niall, I need you to turn your chairs around. Olga and Anya aren't just here to audition. They're here to remind us that music is bigger than any war, any border, any difference between us. They're here to show us what courage looks like when it sings." One by one, the coaches turned their chairs to face the refugee family. Kelly Clarkson was already crying, understanding as a mother what it meant to protect your child while rebuilding your entire life. John Legend looked moved beyond words by the profound journey these two had taken. Niall sat forward with the kind of respectful attention that showed he recognized something extraordinary happening. Blake gently placed one hand on Olga's shoulder and the other on Anya's, creating a protective circle around this mother and daughter who had already shown more courage than most people demonstrate in a lifetime. "Now," Blake said softly, "I want you to sing the way you did when you were scared, the way you did when you needed to remember home, the way you do when music is the only thing that makes sense in a world that's been turned upside down." Olga and Anya looked at each other, sharing a moment of silent communication that had been perfected through months of displacement, uncertainty, and mutual support. Together, they began to sing a traditional Ukrainian lullaby that Anya's grandmother had taught them, but they sang it with English verses that Anya had written herself, creating a bridge between their old home and their new one. "Sleep, my darling. Stars are bright. Mama's here to hold you tight. Though we're far from where we start, Ukraine lives inside our heart." Their voices blended in harmonies that had been perfected, not in music schools, but in refugee camps and crowded apartments, while comforting each other through nightmares and helping each other believe that tomorrow could be better than today. Olga's voice provided the traditional Ukrainian melody while Anya's clear soprano soared above it with English words that told their story of loss, journey, and hope. As they sang, Anya opened her grandmother's music box, and a tiny tinkling melody joined their voices, the sound of home, of family, of traditions that war couldn't destroy even when it destroyed everything else. The studio was completely silent except for their voices and the delicate notes from the music box, creating a moment of pure connection between performers and audience that transcended nationality, language, and every barrier that usually separated people from different worlds. When they finished, the silence lasted longer than usual, not from confusion or uncertainty, but from the recognition that everyone present had just witnessed something sacred: the power of music to preserve identity, the strength of families who refuse to be broken, the beauty that emerges when people choose hope over despair. All four coaches hit their buttons simultaneously, their chairs spinning to face a mother and daughter who had just demonstrated that the most powerful performances come Not from perfect technique, but from perfect authenticity, from voices that carry the weight of real experience. Blake was already walking back toward Olga and Anya before the other chairs had finished turning. When he reached them, he pulled them both into a hug that lasted longer than any embrace in voice history, understanding that he was holding not just contestants, but survivors who had chosen to share their gifts rather than hide their pain. "Olga, Anya," Blake said, his voice thick with emotion he wasn't trying to hide. "That was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard in my life. You didn't just sing a song, you shared your souls, you honored your heritage. You showed everyone in this room that music really can carry us home no matter how far we've traveled." Kelly Clarkson, herself, moved beyond words, added through her tears, "Olga, Anya, what you just shared with us was more than music. You showed us what resilience looks like, what love looks like when it has to be strong enough to survive anything. You made us all better just by listening to you." John Legend said, "That was a masterclass in the power of music to preserve culture, to create connection, to remind us that we're all more alike than different. You've given us a gift by sharing your story and your voices." Niall, clearly emotional, addressed them both directly. "You've shown us that home isn't a place, it's the people you love and the music you carry in your heart. That was absolutely beautiful." Olga and Anya chose Team Blake, not because of strategy or competition, but because they recognized in him someone who understood what it meant to find belonging in unexpected places, someone who valued authenticity over perfection. Over the following weeks, Blake became more than their coach. He became their advocate for refugee families, their bridge to understanding American music culture, while honoring their Ukrainian heritage. He learned basic Ukrainian phrases, arranged for cultural consultants to help them blend their traditional music with contemporary American styles, and most importantly, helped them understand that their refugee experience wasn't something to overcome. It was their greatest strength as artists. "Working with Olga and Anya changed everything for me," Blake said in an interview during the live shows. "They reminded me that the most powerful music comes from the most honest places, from people who've lived something real and have the courage to share it. They didn't just survive war, they brought beauty with them out of that war, and that's what real heroism looks like." Olga and Anya's journey through the competition became a celebration of cultural preservation, family bonds, and the power of music to create home wherever you are. Their version of "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" brought the studio to its feet. Their duet with Blake on "Home" became an anthem about finding belonging through music and love. During the finale, Olga and Anya performed an original song that Blake had helped them write, called "Two Homes." As they sang about carrying Ukraine in their hearts while building a new life in America, about music being the bridge between old and new, about gratitude for both the country that shaped them and the country that welcomed them, there wasn't a dry eye in the studio. Anya finished second in the competition, but their real victory was already won. They had shown millions of viewers that refugees bring gifts as well as needs, that cultural diversity makes America stronger, and that some of the most beautiful music comes from hearts that have learned to find hope in the darkest circumstances. In their final performance speech, delivered with Anya holding the microphone while Olga stood proudly beside her, they shared a message that resonated far beyond the competition. "We want every refugee family to know that you are not just running from something, you are bringing something beautiful with you. Your culture, your music, your stories, these are gifts for your new home. And we want every American to know that when you welcome refugees, you don't just save lives, you make your country more beautiful." Blake stood behind them throughout their speech, tears streaming down his face, as this mother and daughter taught the world a lesson about resilience, gratitude, and the incredible power of music to create bridges between any two worlds. Today, Olga and Anya continue to perform throughout Ohio and beyond, using their platform to advocate for refugee families and to show America the incredible contributions that displaced people bring to their new communities. Olga has returned to teaching music, now helping other refugee children preserve their cultural heritage while learning American songs. The music box that accompanied them from Ukraine to the voice stage now sits in a place of honor in their small American apartment, still playing its tinkling melody that connects them to their grandmother, their homeland, and the journey that brought them home to themselves. Blake Shelton learned something that night that changed his understanding of music forever. Olga and Anya taught me that the most beautiful songs aren't just about personal experience, they're about universal human experience. They reminded me that music really is a universal language, and when people have the courage to sing their truth, it becomes everyone's truth. Because sometimes the most powerful voices belong to people who have lost everything except their ability to sing. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes from hearts that have been broken by circumstances beyond their control, but choose to create beauty anyway. And sometimes a Ukrainian refugee mother and her 9-year-old daughter can teach the world that home isn't a place you're born. It's a place where people welcome your voice, celebrate your gifts, and help you understand that you belong exactly where music finds you. Olga and Anya Petrov proved that the voice isn't about where you come from, it's about having the courage to share where you've been, the strength to show who you are, and the faith to believe that music really can carry you home, no matter how far you've traveled or how much you've lost along the way.